There's a new Trump book, and that means a new set of fresh horrors that we didn't know existed, that we didn't know if we want to know existed. This time, it's all about how unhinged Trump was in those waning days of his presidency, probably well after the Four Seasons debacle, and what a top general, General Mark Milley, did to try and stop Trump's worst impulses. And this is all in the new book called Peril by Bob Woodward and Robert Costa. So twice in the final months of the Trump administration, the country's top military officer was so fearful that the president's actions might spark a war with China that he moved urgently to avert armed conflict. In a pair of secret phone calls, General Mark A. Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, assured his Chinese counterpart, General Li Zhuojiang of the People's Liberation Army, that the United States would not strike, according to a new book by the Washington Post associate editor Bob Woodward and national political reporter Robert Costa. So he's making calls, not allowed to necessarily, not told to necessarily make the calls, but taking it on himself to make two of these calls. One of them took place on October 30th, 4 days before the election that unseated Donald Trump. And the other 2 days after the Capitol siege carried out by his supporters in a quest to cancel the vote on January 8th. So it's interesting to parse out these two calls. The first call was apparently because Milley reviewed intelligence suggesting that the Chinese believed the United States was preparing to attack. That belief, the authors write, was based on tensions over military exercises in the South China Sea and deepened by Trump's belligerent rhetoric toward China. In the call, Milley said, General Lee, I want to assure you that the American government is stable and everything's going to be okay. We are not going to attack or conduct any kinetic operations against you. So he continues, he says that in the book's account, Milley went so far as to pledge he would alert his counterpart in the event of a US attack, stressing the rapport they've established through a back channel. General Lee, you and I have known each other for 5 years. If we're gonna attack, I'm gonna call you ahead of time. It's not going to be a surprise. Which is my favorite part. It's like, so we think maybe he thwarted an attack, but then he actually was just like, okay, but I'll let you know if we do.
I'm not sure what this guy's gonna do, but if I find out, I will let you know. And that's okay. So that's where the drama and the controversy comes in. It's his warning for potential attack, because he doesn't know. Anytime a top general in the US military is gonna talk about how we don't know what this guy's gonna do before January 6th and also afterwards. We just don't know what he's going to do. And yes, that's a very big part of the story. It's intriguing, it's surprising, it's potentially damaging because we don't know how sometimes these backdoor operations and conversations happen. But what we're missing is the fact that we had a president who the top generals had no idea what he was willing to do from the standpoint of potential nuclear war and threatening other countries, because he's that focused on staying in power, because he absolutely, there's nothing else matters in life to him except for himself. And this is not an assumption. This is not just me saying it. This is obvious. Everyone sees that. We see that from his followers. We see what happened on January 6th. We see the way he speaks to people who once supported him, other politicians. If they're not on his side 100% of the time, he's like, I'm done with you. If someone has their loyalty to me, I'm all about it because it's about me. There's no reciprocation for this loyalty. So if you have a guy who's now cornered, all he can do is attack. He talks about it this way. This is the way he is. So if he has the power of the military to do something aggressive like this, and we've seen politicians do this before, engage in conflicts for the sake of somehow galvanizing energy and support around themselves, why wouldn't he? Why wouldn't he? That's what we see as sane politicians do. How about a crazy one? Of course he could.
Right, and this is after he already proved the lengths he was willing to go, strong arming Ukraine into digging up, imaginary dirt on his rival Joe Biden. Like, yeah, he's been saying this is the stuff he would do. And I gotta say, when I read this story, I was actually relieved. I'm gonna be 100. I was like, oh, thank God someone was looking out for us. Because in those waning days, I think we all, let's be real, it was a dark winter, not just because of COVID, but because of Donald Trump and being, the angry little diaper boy that he was the entire time, and being like, this dude is still president. Lame duck Trump is the worst Trump. Like Obama was like, lame duck Obama was the best version of Obama. Lame duck Trump was the worst version of Trump. And I kept on racking my brain thinking, look, all it takes is a military incursion. All it takes is a fabricated or a real terrorist attack or some kind of, military aggression from an adversary like China, like Iran, and that's it. We're starting a war, and they'll be sort of like, oh, martial law, sorry, we can't change presidents right now,
100%.
right? Like that could have easily happened. And I think the fact that General Milley was sounding the alarm behind the scenes actually gives me relief that there is a safeguard, that there is somebody. So I want to go to the second call that he made around after the Capitol insurrection. On January 8th, Milley called senior military officials into his office at the Pentagon to review a process of ordering strikes, including those involving nuclear weapons. Milley went around the room, verbally confirming with each officer they understood that they were not to take orders from anyone unless he, Milley, was involved in the process. Which I'm like, thank you.
That's extreme level event type of stuff. Like, we need to make sure this doesn't happen because this is the last rail. So if I don't know about this, being General Milley there, then we could go into a disastrous situation. So he needs to confirm and make sure. And this is one of those things that now I don't know if everyone's always wondered it, but as the Trump administration was chugging along, and they talk about the deep state and the career politicians and people that are involved in it, and they lambasted the fact that anyone that's a stable a government entity that's working within the administration is there. I was like, I wonder who is left. I wonder who is left in what positions that can still do something in case we get to the extreme that we're not privy to hear and see about before it happens. So yeah, the comfort you had probably comes from the fact that, man, oh my God, there was a guy. Oh, there was a guy. And even if he broke protocol and broke some rules and all that stuff, hey, you know what didn't happen? Nuclear war.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because John isn't here to say this, but obviously every time a new Trump book comes out, we're always like, why didn't we know when it was happening,
Right.
And it's funny because there's been a lot of obvious pushback and obvious, not pushback, outrage from the right. So Marco Rubio's calling for Mark Milley's resignation. Other representatives, Josh Mandel of Ohio. Donald Trump put out a statement, and the opening line is, if the story of dumbass General Mark Milley, the same failed leader who engineered the worst withdrawal from a country, Afghanistan, blah, 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 blah. Don't need to read the rest of that. But the fifth word is dumbass.
Yep. How about an ex-president that speaks like this based off of something that he was doing? Now he's trying to play, I don't know if you can get to, I'm gonna let you get to whether or not he's playing it both ways. Because he says fake news on the story. Because one of the reasons Milley was trying to figure how to corral this energy and keep it from falling strictly in his hands was he was ranting and raving, running around and cussing people out every day. Yeah. So if you have an unbalanced person in office, you need to find some way to balance it. Now Trump does not want that narrative to be seen as true, because it is. Because that makes him look bad. But he also wants to make sure that the narrative of, oh man, Milley really stepped outside of his bounds, he needs to be tried for treason. He wants that part. He can't split it down the middle and say, well, that part's untrue of me going crazy, but then this part is true about him going behind my back. Well, in order for him to go behind your back, you might have to be doing something for him to think that you're crazy. You can't play 100%. Both sides of this.
And that's always what they do. It's shooting the messenger and not actually what happened of potential aggression against China in those waning days. Yes, and that is exactly what I was going to say, was that here is something we found out that where someone actually stepped up in the moment. One of the people pushing back on General Mark Milley is actually Alexander Vindman, who testified against Trump in that first impeachment trial. If you guys remember, he was a former lieutenant colonel who said, yes, I know that Trump put pressure on Ukraine, and he's saying now that Milley should resign if he in fact did this. Well, here's the difference. I mean, no disrespect to Alexander Vindman or his service or his testimony, but he did this after the fact, right? what was happening during it, right? And this is something that General Mark Milley is trying to prevent active war, right? And I feel like that is going a length for our national security that not enough people did during the Trump years, to be honest.
Check out the Damage Report podcast each day, wherever you get your podcasts, whether Pocket Casts or Stitcher or iTunes. You can join me as I give you the news and stories you want, with a range of co-hosts and interview guests jumping in on the fun each day. Again, that's the Damage Report, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you get them at iTunes, don't forget to rate and review. Sometimes I'll read them live on the show.